This year's theme for the CEHC is Here for Housing. It's our opportunity to convene, collaborate, and drive meaningful change to improve and expand housing affordability, creation, choice, and stability across our state. Join in on the conversation by using the hashtag CAHC 2024 across all social platforms. This session that we are diving into now is called Banding Together, Community Land Trusts and Housing Co-ops for Permanent Affordability. Before we dive in, we would like to thank our presenting sponsor, the Connecticut Housing Finance Authority, our visionary sponsor, Wells Fargo, our champion sponsors, Liberty Bank, the Connecticut Department of Housing, Cohn Resnick, Trinity Financial, J.D. Amelia and Associates, and Robinson and Cole. And thank you to our foundation sponsors. These sponsors' deep support help us make the conference happen each year and keep it free for everyone to attend, which we love. And finally, the investor sponsor that is sponsoring this session is the Sedeka House. So thank you so much to them. A few housekeeping items before we dive in. This session is being recorded, and we will make all recordings available as soon as possible on the partnership's YouTube channel. Please remain on mute unless a speaker asks you to unmute. And if at any point you have any tech issues, just let us know in the chat, and we'll try to sort out whatever is going on for you. In terms of questions, feel free to submit your questions through the chat. Both myself, Amy, Alex, and Wandy will be monitoring the chat for any questions, so feel free to submit those there. And don't forget that post-session, you can complete a session feedback survey by clicking on the megaphone icon that is in the lobby of the whole conference. We really try our best to keep improving the conference each year. So please don't be shy to give us feedback about what you loved, what you didn't love, what you would like to see more of. We really, really appreciate that feedback. So please do go ahead and fill out that survey whenever you get a chance. With that, I will stop sharing my screen and I will kick it over to Alex, who's going to get us started. Thanks so much.
Thank you. So I will share my slides. Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Alexander Kolokotronis. I'm director of the Naugatuck Valley Project and of our community land trust arm, the Naugatuck Valley Housing Development Corporation. I'll be co-presenting with Wandy Luna, who's the president of Hillside View Housing Cooperative, which is one of the cooperatives, one of the 6 cooperatives that comprise the Brookside Housing Co-ops. These are some pictures from a community day that we had recently, and as well as some media coverage we've been receiving this past year. The title Banding Together comes from actually a book that is on the first 25 years of our organization, Banded Together, Economic Democratization in the Brass Valley, by Jeremy Brecker. It's on the first 25 years of Naugatuck Valley Project, which was formed in 1983 as a partnership between the Catholic Archdiocese, the Lutheran Synod, CCAG, and the United Auto Workers to save factories in the Naugatuck Valley in the face of deindustrialization. And so out of that, we actually formed 3 worker cooperatives to save, as a means of saving factories in the valley. And that is something that we focused on for about 12 to 15 years. Through that, we as an organization of organizations, we have other labor unions as members of NVP. We have churches and the mosques that are members of NVP, and other groups, community groups, ethnic-based community groups, and so forth that are also a part of NVP. Though NVP was founded as an organization focused on saving jobs and saved around 3,000 jobs in terms of saving the retirement incomes of workers at manufacturing plants, in the late 80s, NVP started to focus on housing. And one of the reasons was that through networks of employee owners at NVP, what was starting to be noticed was that there were skyrocketing rent increases across the Naugatuck Valley. This was happening across the United States as there was deregulation around condominium conversions. And so one place in which a real sort of awful set of events was starting to occur was at Shamrock Ridge, an apartment complex in Waterbury, 172 units. As you can see in one of the bullet points, the rent had tripled over a number of years. That's right, tripled. And the property was passed along between multiple mega landlords, in some cases, folks who were attempting to carry out condominium conversions and force out tenants. Relates a bit to sort of the discussion that what we heard earlier around just cause eviction protections, which is something that Naugatuck Valley Project has also been in support of. A key leader there was Evelyn Lush. I mention her for a reason, as she was not only a leader of that tenants association, that tenants union, but also a leader in establishing what ended up becoming the Brookside Housing Cooperatives. And what that looked like was NVP sort of weighing in the late 80s how to go about potentially transitioning this apartment complex over into a housing cooperative, to convert it into a housing co-op. That did not happen. It's a longer story with a lot of details, and actually, it's a very sort of shocking story if it's the first time you've encountered sort of stories around landlord-tenant relations, around mega landlords. But what ended up happening was that NVP had actually built up enough power, in part through its member organizations. Recall, I had mentioned that NVP is an organization of organizations and has an affiliate membership organizational structure, mobilized across the valley to secure bonding and secure state bonding, state financing, and city land. And the question was, okay, is NVP going to outright own that land? Is it going to be a standalone co-op or set of co-ops in this new construction venture? What was the model going to be? What was the model going to be that would allow or enable NVP to preserve itself as, first and foremost, a community organizing entity, and at the same time, ensure there was a sustainable, permanently affordable housing development in place. And so that's where we actually came upon community land trusts. This is not our slide; it's a slide that we took over from a website promoting the notion of public investment in shared equity home ownership models, of which housing co-ops are one. And so the land trust is a separate entity. The land trust is one where NVP has representation on it, and we will get into that. The co-ops have representation on it. Community representatives or public interest representatives are on it. But there's a sort of delineation in ownership and in title. And so what that looks like is that the community land trust owns the land. The community land trust, as an owner of the land, stewards what sits on it, stewards the land, and stewards who a ground lease is set out to the leasee. And in this case, with the Brookside Housing Cooperatives, that is the housing cooperatives, which are democratically run organizations. There isn't a landlord, and if there is, it would be the tenant, the residents themselves, the members themselves, not tenants. So you'll hear sleight of hand sometimes. I mean, even among ourselves, I almost did it just now. Of tenancy versus membership, of rent versus carrying charges. Residents pay a monthly carrying charge, and it operates at cost, not for profit. So again, what that looks like is the cooperatives operate according to a one unit, one vote model. And in that one unit, one vote model, vote for their officers. But we'll get more into detail around that. But again, the purpose here in the slide is to show that there's a separation of ownership and title to the land and title to the buildings. And there is a ground lease arrangement that is at the bedrock of this. So to get a little bit more in detail about this, the CLT is a nonprofit as well. This is not something that operates for profit. There's, again, this dual ownership structure. There are ground leases, typically 99 years. This is a model that in the United States emerged in the late 60s out of the civil rights movement. So for all we hear about community land trusts as a sort of model for an entity that is promoting and actively stewarding permanent affordability, that in part comes out of the civil rights movement and out of looking at other models around the world as well and globally. And I think that's an important piece to take out of this as well, because as we talk about the current affordable housing crisis in the United States, it's important we're also drawing from other models around the world here. And I bring that here because there's been some mention of not great events as well in housing cooperatives elsewhere in Connecticut. And part of that is is structural. It's not something about cooperatives themselves or shared equity home ownership models. But how we actually look at this structurally in terms of what is the broader policy and administrative regime that housing cooperatives operate within. And so when we look elsewhere, when we look maybe to New York City, when we look to other countries with a large housing co-op sector, what exists there is a kind of second tier structure. And that is a structure where you have anything from associations that are associations of housing cooperatives or federations of housing cooperatives that are capable of providing further financing for existing and new cooperatives that have staffing for support, all of that. And while our CLT is not necessarily yet at the scale in which we operate as some of maybe the other associations we'll see globally, or technical assistance organizations or second tier structures, what the CLT does function as is in part as this kind of second tier structure that supports the mission of housing cooperatives, of shared equity, that supports its ability to democratically govern itself. And it's important to mention this because sometimes when we hear about cooperatives or we see interest in cooperatives, and I'm speaking as someone who's also worked in worker cooperative development, there's a notion sometimes that when people first hear of shared equity or cooperative models in any sector, that this is sort of some magic bullet solution. It'll solve anything and everything on its own. And what ends up getting missing from this conversation is the necessity of second tier structures that provide active support. And that's something that we have across anything else. I mean, businesses of any kind have incubators, chambers of commerce, sectoral business associations or industry associations, trade associations. And we miss that sometimes when we talk about cooperatives and when we talk about when they do have shortcomings and don't meet the idealism that sometimes not even those who are very mission driven about cooperatives sort of see them in, but as well as policymakers and others who begin to become interested in this. And so a key piece in what we're talking about in our model is this stewardship piece. This ties into the perpetual affordability. Part of what is in the ground lease or what works with the ground lease between a CLT and a cooperative is that the ground lease necessitates that the cooperatives stay permanently affordable. And the co-ops themselves, within their own bylaws and within their own agreements, have resale restriction formulas. And so co-ops are sort of this middle ground of being able to build equity and build wealth, but to not do so in a way that is unrestricted or really speculative. And so you can't be someone necessarily who buys property and then sees your gains doubled, tripled, quadrupled, sort of going back to the situation we were just talking about from which these Brookside co-ops even emerged. So that's a key piece, something that's legally embedded, not just sort of in the spirit of what this is, but in the actual tenure and leasing of the CLT to the co-op. And to bring it back also to the point around this second tier structure piece, there is active training, active advocacy and led by NVHDC. When we're talking about our model of Brookside Housing Cooperatives, which you'll hear a little bit more about from Wandy as a president of one of the co-ops, folks are volunteers. I mean, they're doing this on a volunteer basis. We're talking about folks who are from working families, heads of working families, have jobs that can range in terms of what those occupations are. And so an organization like the Community Land Trust functions to continuously train folks in self-management. And why that's important is that some of the stories that you'll hear around co-ops are about just not being able to have that ongoing training. And so as folks move in, folks who, I mean, most of us have never really experienced cooperatives or democratically run models in any aspect of our lives. There needs to be something in place or a vehicle in place and a set of institutional mechanisms in place that provides that training and that technical assistance. So again, something that our CLT provides. And one thing that's very important here, and something that I always express, is that I am not a property manager. Like very clear, there's a clear delineation. I am not a property manager. But I'm someone who coaches, who trains, who provides technical assistance in other ways. And so I'm someone who, in my background, has also been a labor union organizer and a tenants union organizer. And so part of that in my role has been to engage in leadership development. And so when we as NVP, NVHDC support our cooperatives in partnership, what we're supporting is build the capacity building in self-management and in engaging in cooperative decision-making, deliberation, and problem solving. And so the way this looks at a community land trust in terms of this wider partnership and this broader mission, beyond even simply the cooperatives themselves that currently exist, but this broader public community mission is represented in our board structure. So you see there's a tripart governance structure in which there are residents who are represented. Each co-op has a representative on the CLT. There are community members and there are public representatives. For us, what this means with NVP and its very direct connection is that there are 3 NVP board members as well, and I'll get to that as well a little bit later, or right here on the slide rather, where it shows the tripart structure looks like for us a 5th NVP, 40% Brookside, and outside representatives who might be technical experts, folks who have a real sort of expertise around maybe something legally or something around contracting. And so we get a real mix of knowledge and representation in our community land trust. So there's a flexibility. The tripartite governance structure is a broad sort of capacious way of looking at how a CLT board can be structured, but within it has a flexibility to meet the needs and mission of what that particular CLT or adjoining set of organizations is looking to do. So this is a map, or sorry, this is a bird's eye picture of the Brookside Housing Cooperatives. It's 19 buildings, 6 cooperatives, and there are 102 units. The most that somebody pays for a 4-bedroom currently is $780 a month. There's they are in many cases financially doing quite well, the cooperatives, and again, there's a firm connection to the broader NVP structure. NVP itself has the housing cooperatives as affiliated with it as well as one of the member organizations. So we have a lot of cross pollination and cross fertilization between NVP, NVHDC, and the Brookside Housing Cooperatives. We've also been getting out there more. This was some pictures from the beginning, just to elevate again. Oh, sorry, let me go back, actually. Let me bring up the current slide. Okay, so part of what we're doing is, I mean, there's a lot of technical pieces to this, but again, the leadership development part is also about just building community and engaging in community building. When there are stronger relationships between folks within cooperatives, there is a lower barrier for engaging in sometimes more heated deliberative and decision-making processes. It takes the heat out of those. And so we're better equipped to engage in not just problem solving around more immediate or emergency issues, but more long run planning. And so that is sort of the banding together. We're banding together. Co-op members are banding together within single cooperatives, across cooperatives, and across Greater Waterbury, where the Brookside cooperatives sit to engage in this broader mission of, hey, what does solving, or at least being a piece to solving the affordable housing crisis look like? And that's where you see here at the bottom a piece that I wrote for Better Connecticut Institute, which is an emerging think tank, where when we talk about housing cooperatives, we're really talking about what is a sort of true original form of workforce housing. The folks that live at Brookside are folks who are teachers, who are postal workers, who are construction workers, who are paraeducators, who are care workers in terms of nursing homes and home care. When we talk about the workforce of Connecticut, and also all of those occupations are ones where we see headlines around job shortages, in part related to the housing crisis. housing cooperatives are at its heart workforce housing, and in functioning as workforce housing and in putting together the leadership development piece from the community land trust angle, is really a way of stewarding and developing our workforce. And so as we talk about workforce housing, we talk about the shortages we have in Connecticut. It's really important to really see housing cooperatives in that light as well. And we can get more into that in terms of the role that labor unions had played in the 1920s, in the late 40s, 1950s, and 60s in New York City, in building tens of thousands of units of housing cooperatives that still serve as a staple to the workforce, to a segment of the workforce in New York City, and have functioned as permanently affordable units. So again, if there are any takeaways, I would say from this presentation, it's the ability for housing cooperatives to serve as workforce housing, the permanent affordability that is locked in by having a CLT housing co-op combo. As one person had put in another webinar I'd seen, I love the phrase, a kind of belt and suspenders for permanent affordability. It is not just baked into the co-op structure, but in the CLT structure and its relationship to the co-op. And more broadly, building community. I mean, with the housing crisis and rent going up and up and up, I mean, what we're really seeing is also the fabrics of our communities really torn apart. I mean, how could we really participate and grow a community that we know, love, have deep ties to, and have deep bonds to, if folks are having having to get 2, 3, 4 jobs to actually pay for rent? And what we have at our housing co-ops is a situation where I believe are probably among the most affordable units in the state of Connecticut. So to talk a little bit more about the experience of being in a cooperative, I'll hand it off to Wandy.
Thanks, Alex. Hi, everyone. My name is Wandy. I am an existing member of Brookside Cooperative and currently hold a position of president for Hillside View Co-op, which is one of the 6 associations within Brookside that houses 102 families. I moved in a little over 25 years ago as a single parent who had just left a domestic situation. And initially moving in, I'll be really honest, I had no idea what I was even getting into. My main focus at the time was getting into a safe environment with my kids that was going to be affordable to me. I didn't have any background on what Brookside was or what even a cooperative was. Shortly after moving in, trainings were being offered to all members that I attended, where I learned about roles within the cooperative and what my expectations were as a member. Throughout the years, I worked alongside many of the members, including Evelyn Lush, who took me under her wing as a member. And the more time I spent learning about my community and Brookside, the more invested I became in it. Brookside allows us as the people to have a voice, and it allows us to shape our own community. Hillside, which is my co-op, consists of 18 families. We meet monthly, like the other 5 associations within Brookside, and we discuss everything from who's planning a party to who forgot to pick up the dog poop in the backyard, spending. And we're also part of a selection process when it comes to determining new membership when we have vacancies. The best part, though, is that we all work together for the best interest of each other. I also sit in the all committee board, which consists of 1 member from each co-op, although anyone can really attend in Brookside to discuss the property as a whole. The biggest pro for me in being a part of the Brookside community is the involvement. We all have a voice and a say in our community and how we run it. Our decisions are based on the interests of everyone who lives at Brookside. And just like Alex mentioned, because we are not profit driven, our carrying charges, AKA rents, are based on the majority vote, which makes our living more affordable. Brookside actually allowed me to return to school and finish my degree. I think that if I was living anywhere else, the barrier of finances would have made it difficult for me to even continue my education. And if I wasn't blessed with this opportunity, I would have still been working 2 jobs to afford daycare just to go to work. Most importantly for me, Brookside provided me a peace of mind. My past experiences made it really difficult for me to trust, much less want to welcome any new friendships. And being involved at Brookside showed me that many of the people that I lived around had similar stories, we shared the same values and ideas when it came to our community and ensuring that it provided a safe, stable, and healthy environment for our families. My neighbors became friends who eventually for me became family. And Brookside is like one of my kids right now. It's like my baby. I'm really protective of the community that I live in. I'm proud of where I live. And I want to continue to see something like this grow. I want to see us expand and if opportunities like this can be offered to more people, I want to have a go at it because I think Brookside for me definitely provided a great opportunity.
Okay, so I can answer some questions, or we can answer some questions in here. How are the cooperatives funded? Are there any requirements for compliance with legal documentation? Yes, as to the compliance terms. So part of and this was a big reason I actually showed this slide, and I'll bring up the slide again since it's relevant. 1 second, pull up the slide. Um, 1 second, play from current slide. Part of this was, again, mobilizing to secure public financing. This was a moment where, again, there was a affordability crisis in Connecticut in the mid late 80s, and a larger pool of bonding was set aside for housing. And we've heard a little bit about that as well earlier today. Our sort of piece in this was being able to mobilize to secure a segment or a cut or a piece of that bonding for building Brookside. And with that, there were a number of compliance agreements or terms that we had to come to, and that has floated between different agencies over time. And so initially, I believe this was with the Department of Housing, then it was with the Department of Economic and Community Development, and then eventually over to the Connecticut Housing Finance Authority. And so, yes, there are compliance pieces to this. There is a limited equity housing co-op statute or set of statutes that co-ops, largely in Connecticut, are under. I do not believe I don't really know of any market rate housing cooperatives within Connecticut. The ones I do know of are all limited equity housing cooperatives, and we do have income limits and restrictions in terms of selection, in terms of who can come in. So yeah, there are a number of pieces involved in this. But a great thing about the cooperative decision-making structure, again, largely throughout its 33 years of operating, has been a fair amount of ability to make autonomous decisions and engage in self-management and problem solving around things that make sense. So that is a piece. In terms of another question about how do we select non community members or non, I guess, co-op members. That's something that has dipped and has decreased over time in terms of the representation of that. And so part of it is just like any other board. It's really board recruitment, folks who are aligned with the mission and folks who bring a set of expertise that aligns with that mission as well. I mean, for example, if we can get somebody who is totally on the ball with co-op law or housing and co-op law, I'd welcome a conversation. We'd welcome a conversation with you. And or if we're talking about people who have a range of networks around contracting, and we're going out to find bids for something related to fixing whatever problem might be that's current or longer term. Again, something that's very helpful, especially as we go over and really look into the details of what it is we're trying to execute on and collaborate on. So in a way, it's sort of like any other board in terms of board recruitment, and then in a way, it's also again about this alignment with the broader mission and understanding of what it is we're really going about, and that's where NVP plays a role as well. Again, a really key piece here with NVP. I mean, we just had our awards dinner the other night for NVP on Saturday, and we had about 15 to 20 folks represented from the Brookside Housing Co-ops sitting at tables alongside labor union leaders, faith leaders, broader sets of community members. And so we try and create spaces or co-create spaces where broader networks are more than just tapped into in an abstract way. Folks can really meet each other and identify with each other and build together. One thing we have been doing, and feel free to message us about this, is we have been hosting folks to come and visit the Brookside Housing Cooperatives. We've done more personalized ones, 2 or 3 folks come from an organization. We've done bigger ones with 25 to 30 people. Naugatuck Valley Project is a backbone organization of the All In Alliances. There will be a panel on All In tomorrow, which are town-based groups focused on housing instability and security and food insecurity largely, as well as in voices in decision making. And we had folks from across the All In Alliances in the Naugatuck Valley come and visit to really explore the model and talk with Brookside leaders. So this is where it's really important as well that the cooperatives and us are really situated in a broader network, because when we're situated in a broader network, we can actually draw from that network to bring in new board members who can participate and take leadership. Okay. What types of policies? Another question is, what types of policies or incentives, either the state or municipal level, are currently supportive of housing co-ops, and what policies would you like to see in place to better support existing or the development of new housing co-ops? That's a great question. The one that was talked about earlier was Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act. I think something that we actually lack in the state of Connecticut is a preservation strategy. We're seeing more and more a new construction strategy, but a housing preservation strategy is one that we sorely lack. In fact, I'm not sure I've heard the word much in the state of Connecticut over the last few years. We're seeing this talked about a bit in Massachusetts. Uh, there is a community land trust acquisition fund, I believe, in Massachusetts that just passed. It'd be great if we had something like that. We do have certain language on the books in statute around a land trust fund. There should be money appropriated into that. I think the land trust definition might need to be a bit modified to meet the flexibility of community land trusts themselves. But there's currently, I believe, no real publicly named means for a community land trust to tap into all of the money that we've been hearing is starting to be put into housing. On the preservation piece, I mean, this gets into my personal story. I was living at a very what I felt was an affordable apartment, and ultimately my apartment was condemned, fell into disrepair. With my neighbors, formed a tenants union. We were retaliated against for, or at least however you might say it, at least afterwards, we got eviction threats. I mean, we had it posted on our door, all of that. And one of the asks that we had for a collective bargaining agreement, or in our collective bargaining agreement, would be to actually create a right of first refusal in a collective bargaining agreement. That's something that exists, and it exists not just like for co-ops. It exists. It's a standard contract mechanism in other ways. And so, Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act would be effectively something like that. It would be effectively a right of first refusal. We have that for mobile home parks. Why should we just have it for mobile home parks? We should be extending that out to residents. And DC has a Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act, of which thousands of housing co-op units have been created as a result. DC itself, of course, is facing a crisis, but imagine it lacked Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act. That would be, I believe, about 3,000 to 4,000 units that are affordable gone, and what is already a bad crisis being deeply worsened. So I think that's another piece. And really, a big piece to how housing co-ops were developed in the 50s and 60s in this really supercharged way in New York was through policies that eased development for them. I mean, incentives, public financing that was in place that allowed for housing co-op developers to get better or favorable interest rates. A lot of it is in the financing. But if we feel that promoting a legal structure and even a sort of cultural structure in a sense that promotes deliberation, decision making, even sort of personal and human development in terms of engaging in that kind of a model is something that we want, and it's something that we want to tackle multiple crises at once. Then we should have policies in place that provide favorable financing for cooperatives. I think another piece that's really important is a technical putting in place support for technical assistance. So, for example, an organization like ours, I would love to see some public investment in us as a technical assistance provider. And the reason why I bring this up is that some of the crises we've seen around individual co-ops have been co-ops that, and we don't really actually have this issue in Brookside, I think, co-ops that have seen leadership sort of stagnate for decades. The same people are in place for 20, 30, 40 years. And the result is that newer members, when newer folks enter, there isn't necessarily, again, that training around what a co-op is. And so over time, what you see happen is that it becomes disproportionately, even majority, even super majority, a set of folks who don't necessarily fully understand or have been incorporated into the structure to see that they're not just renters, they're co-owners and they're co-decision makers. And what we've seen as outcomes is, again, co-ops falling in some cases into severe disrepair and needing millions of dollars to do that. And sometimes the state has stepped in. I mean, what if we were proactive about it? What if we took a 20th, a 30th of that money, a 50th of that money that goes into state investment into or state sort of state saving strategies around co-ops and put that into technical assistance? I mean, like an organization of ours, if we could hire more staff around co-op trainers and have that designated out to co-ops around the state, I think that'd be something that would be fantastic and would preserve existing co-ops, but also provide a base and groundwork for further developing in the future. Another thing I could imagine also is there's a certain partnership structure we might be able to have. If developers are interested in developing co-ops, we as a community land trust can partner in a way where our specific role is around training co-ops, co-op leaders, co-op members. In the past, when co-ops have been developed as standalone structures, it sometimes was just a very, it was a very romantic idea in the moment. It seemed like it solved a lot of problems at once, as I was sort of mentioning earlier. But then without the training structure, without any of that, sort of fell off by the wayside, and co-ops again fell into internal crises. So if we actually from the get-go had housing co-op development that was paired with someone who was a technical assistant such as ourselves, I think we would see more sustainable co-ops that could then spawn off more. Let's see. Metrics that are most important for evaluating the success of how co-ops and how, or let me see. Please keep pointing to, is there a way to build in that? Yes. Is there a way to build in that kind of technical assistance into the organal structure of the co-op? Absolutely. Yeah. I actually, this is something we want to build up more in our selection process or in selection. A big piece that's messaged during interviews is participating in trainings, participating in meetings, and so forth. And so that's for now, that's just language, right? I mean, and so there are ways that yes can be baked into the structure. I sometimes, for example, individually attend co-op meetings. We create different spaces. I mean, some of those community spaces are not solely just, for building community. They are for that, but those are spaces where, the trainings come up. In some cases, I'm bringing up the history of the Brookside Housing Co-ops and what this was founded on. And so, um, uh, the staffing again is a real piece, because if we can have more staff time devoted to that, to the organizing. I mean, I've door knocked at Brookside Housing Co-ops. I've tried as an individual person on this part of the CLT to not just get to know the elected officers and leaders at Brookside, but to get to know the wider membership base, because that's what's key. We're trying to build a bench of leaders at Brookside, not just sort of be slightly, on the mark, making sure that we have the positions filled, but actually we have a bench of leaders, and that we can really look into the future and engage in long run planning in that way. Let me see if there are other questions. I'll say one more thing. This is not just something that personally resonates with me um, in terms of my own housing situation that I spoke to briefly. My mother, a Black woman from Germany, born and raised, grew up in a housing co-op in Germany. When I asked her about sort of housing insecurity and stability issues that we faced here in the United States, if she recalls anything similar, she can't recall a memory around something like that. So it was definitely a source of stability for someone such as my mother in 60s and 1970s Germany. I have other family in Europe who have lived in housing co-ops and who have talked about how, yes, I mean, when you engage in democratic decision making, that can be a little rough sometimes, but have also had it as a source of stability for themselves. I have an aunt in Sweden, for example, who lives in a housing co-op and was a part of purchasing her building there. And the question about whether this is scalable, of course, I know we'll hear that always about anytime we bring up Scandinavia, that is something like, well, that's a different place. Does that work? Could that work here? Regardless, about a third of multifamily housing in Sweden is housing cooperatives. So a key to that is these second tier structures that we spoke of. So this is something that is scalable. It's, are we putting in place policies and being creative, but not so creative? I mean, again, there's models elsewhere where we're building up that second tier piece where there can be people in place and personnel in place and technical pieces in place that can support folks to engage in self-management. That folks such as Wandy to be a part and be leaders in their co-ops, because it's not sustainable to sort of think we can come up with magic bullet solutions that don't have other supporting structural features to them.
Thanks so much, Alex. I'm not seeing any new questions in the chat, so if anybody has anything, please feel free to type it right now. If not, we can go ahead and wrap up a few minutes early. I want to thank you, Alex and Wandy, for sharing your stories and for sharing all of that really, really helpful information. Did another one just pop in? My chat. Okay. Cool. So again, a reminder that this whole presentation and answers to any questions will be posted on the partnership's YouTube channel if you're, want to go back and reference it in the future. And that wraps up day one of this year's conference. So please come back and join us tomorrow starting at 9:30, I believe. We'll have our second day. Thank you so much to everyone who participated, asked questions, tuned in. We're excited to keep the momentum going. And again, thank you so much again, Alex and Wandy.